Good evening. Welcome to today's session on Pre-PAC, a mechanism for MSME restructuring. Myself, Madhura, Executive Director of Indian Lawyers Association. Before we begin, let me quickly give you an overview of what we do and then also introduce our panelists for the day. So we are a not-for-profit organization with about 70 plus chapters all over India. And we do activities for professional education of lawyers, giving them a platform to networking, giving guidance and mentoring to young lawyers and students. We'll be very happy to invite all of you to join us, be a part of this mission, and be a part of a chapter in your city. So I'll send more information over email to all of you by tomorrow. So let me quickly introduce our panel. Kanishka Tyagi, partner, Legum Amicus. Kanishka has extensive exposure in mergers and acquisitions, real estate, general corporate commercial advisory, insolvency and bankruptcy, publications and addresses, and litigation. She has executed and advised both foreign and domestic companies. She has been a regular contributor to law magazines and journals and regular speaker at conferences and seminars. Kanishka is currently heading Business Strategies Department of Legum Amicus based in New Delhi. Her personal interest lies in structuring of new businesses, startups, and structuring them with a holistic approach. Welcome, Kanishka. We have Mr. Amir Bhavani, Principal Associate, Dhirandir Associates. His core expertise lies in dispute resolution, especially involving Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code 2016, banking laws, and general corporate. He regularly appears before various judicial, quasi-judicial authorities, including High Court, Debt Recovery Tribunal, and National Company Law Tribunal. He advises significant number of companies, creditors, other stakeholders to identify and adopt the most suitable approach to deal with a complex web of possible outcomes and legal strategies to effectively deal with aspects of corporate insolvency and restructuring process. Welcome, Mr. Amir. We have Hemant Kothari, independent legal practitioner. Hemant advises his clients on a wide range of matters in various practice areas relating to transaction advisory and dispute resolution. He is also appointed by the government of Rajasthan as Assistant to Additional Advocate General, General Major R.P. Singh. Prior to starting his independent practice, Hemant has worked with Khaitan and Company, Mumbai and Chiramrit Legal LLP, Jaipur. Hemant is practicing before Rajasthan High Court in Jaipur, apart from other courts and tribunals in both Jaipur and New Delhi. Welcome, Mr. Hemant. Our moderator for the day, Richa Saraf, Manager, Legal in Sumida Management Solutions Private Limited. She has extensive experience in corporate and finance laws and has worked with NBFC clients, startups, fintech companies, and other corporate firms. Richa also has a significant exposure in corporate litigation, having represented clients before the National Company Law Tribunals. Keenly interested in academic research and writing, she has authored over 40 articles in recent case laws and which have been published in reputed journals and blogs. Richa, over to you. We could begin.
Thank you, Madhura, for a brief introduction of all the participants. Our topic for today is Pre-PAC, a mechanism for MSME restructuring. So as we all know, given the COVID scenario, the overall economic scenario in the country has been quite difficult. There has been several legislative amendments in the insolvency law that has been made. The Reserve Bank of India, the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Board of India, other sectoral regulators have kept up their multidimensional efforts to maintain financial stability and also to mitigate the impact of COVID. All COVID debt related debt has been temporarily suspended from the purview of IBC, and RBI had also directed banks to grant moratorium for classifying loan as non-performing. To address the practical difficulties faced during the various insolvency and liquidation proceedings, the Indian judiciary has also been quite proactive. In fact, at the Supreme Court level as well, there has been significant judgments, and they've also been holding virtual hearings during the time of COVID as well. As a part of COVID relief, small enterprises have been fortified on account of an increase in the threshold for invoking insolvency to rupees 1 crore from rupees 1 lakh. However, as per RBI data as of January 2021, the outstanding bank credit to MSME sector amounted to over 12.8 lakh crores, nearly comprising 13.5% of the total gross bank credit as of January 2021. Therefore, given the circumstances, it was pertinent that an amendment be brought about in the IBC for quicker resolution and cost-effective resolution, specifically designed for micro, small, and medium-term enterprises. So that is why the prepackaged insolvency resolution process was brought about by an amendment in the IBC in 2021 itself. So while I've given you a brief overview about why this prepack was required, I would like request the speakers to give a brief overview on their view on the prepack. So let me start with Kanishk ma'am, if you can give your brief view on prepack.
Thank you so much, Richa, and thank you, Madhura, and thank you, ILA, for giving me this opportunity to speak today to address the lawyers. I'm assuming law students are also here. And it is my pleasure to address the lawyers today on the topic of pre-pack. As Richa just summarized that why pre-packs have been introduced, and they've been recently introduced in India because primarily because of as a direct outcome or as a direct impact on the industry in general, on the business in general, caused by COVID-19 situation. Yes, pre-packs have been introduced as a direct impact, but in coming future, we may see that pre-packs, which are currently only available for special kind of entities, business entities, which fall under the definition of micro, small, and medium enterprises, may be extended to other business entities also, which do not fall within the definition, within the confines of micro, small, and medium. So we can say that this is just a sort of not a testing period, but still we've tried to just introduce it in a limited way, and then based on the experience with these micro, small, and medium enterprises, pre-packs may be extended to other entities also. Pre-packs are definitely, I feel, the need of the hour, because especially in the current context, because it provides a quicker resolution, and more so because when we see CIP, corporate insolvency resolution process, a very small percentage of applications are initiated by the corporate debtor himself or herself. I should use itself here. But as opposed to CIRP, there are incentives for business entities under pre-packs to initiate pre-pack insolvency resolution process. Firstly, and the major charm for a business owner or promoter, group of promoters, is that they get to retain the control of their business. So there is really less disruption to the business. Secondly, it also offers them the advantage of arriving at the terms and conditions of the resolution in a private process. It is not really governed by tribunal, by adjudicating authority. So these incentives in form of, because it consumes less time, it consumes obviously less cost, and does not cause that much disruption to the business, and it is based on the model of debtor in possession. These things, these features, in my understanding, give incentive to the business owners or promoters to proceed with applications under pre-pack insolvency resolution process. And also, if we look at the other side, other benefit, if I can use that word, that is attached to PPIRP, is that courts are less burdened, will be less burdened because of this, because their role is not as enlarged as the case is with corporate insolvency resolution process. So we are still seeing how organizations are taking advantages, and we'll see in coming time that there will be instances when the process may be abused by some organizations. But I think it's still in very nascent stage. I feel it was need of the hour because of the direct impact of COVID-19 situation, and it will prove to be beneficial for businesses in general, and for economy, and for also it will lessen the burden on the courts, on the tribunals, as opposed to CIR. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am, for your view. Can we have the view of Mr. Bhavani now? Post that Mr. Kothari can also give his view.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Thank you, Richa. Thank you, Madhura, and thank you, Aile, for having me. I believe that one should keep in mind that the companies in India, the corporates, 70% of the companies in India constitute MSME sector. So there had to be a preferential treatment or a big push for them. Also, it will evade the teething problems which we faced under IBC for CIRP process. So people usually ask me, usually the interns, that why, sir, we have this PPIRP only for MSME, and I say that because that constitutes 70%, and also the teething problems could be phased out. So that's first. Second thing is we should keep in mind, and as Kanishka already stated, that it'll keep the tribunals burden free, and we will only go for the substantial amount of work at the fag end when everything is in place. One thing we should also keep in mind is the creditors, that is the secure creditors or the banks or financial institutions, they are already on board. And apart from that, though it gives an MSME an advantage that they can retain it under section 20 and 29A, there are also equivalent checks and balances. That there are penal provisions, like if you don't satisfy the debts of the operational creditors, then your base resolution plan would not be approved. Even if the plan is approved, which is still satisfying the operational creditors, but there is no change of management, then also the MSME would not be held scot-free. So these are the checks and balances which are actually given to the MSME, and this is more of a testing phase for the Indian economy to see that whether if this pre-pack regime, which is otherwise successful in the foreign jurisdiction, how it proves with the Indian jurisdiction. And very recently, we all must have seen that NCLT Ahmedabad bench a couple of days prior only has given a nod. So that was the first case pan-India. So I believe it's a very welcome move. And MSME being 70% of constituting Indian companies should have been given this priority. And I am very happy with this, because it's not only cost effective or lessening the burden of the tribunal, but at the same time, it gives a sense of responsibility to the corporate debtors or the corporate applicants, as opposed to section 10 of CIRP under IBC. They are held liable here very badly. And I'm sure all of us would be discussing that. So yes, according to me, it's a very nice and a welcoming move. Thank you so much.
Yes, as Richard told, after Mr. Bhavani, I will give my 2 cents on the topic. Much has been said already by Ms. Tyagi and Mr. Bhavani. I'll restrict myself to giving a background and sort of conceptual basis on where we are in terms of our insolvency regime. And here I will commend obviously the amount of efforts that the judiciary and the parliament have put in developing the insolvency regime since 2016, which was not in place in reality before that. The SICA was there, but that was also for limited purposes. The Companies Act processes were long and time consuming. So we tweaked the entire insolvency regime from a debtor in control model to a creditor in control model under IBC. And in 4 years or after 5 years, we are into a further tweak in our insolvency regime, whereby we will now have a mixture of creditor in control and debtor in control model for the first time in India. And that kind of makes it a unique and also is commendable. The regulators are also to be commended for this effort, that with this pace in last 5 years, we have come to a level where we are exploring new avenues which have already had success in developed jurisdictions. The jurisdictions like UK have had so much success with pre-pack, and we'll discuss in minute details how the entire process works and how the creditors are in control, how the debtors are in control, and what are the incentives for both sides to come to a table and agree on a roadmap to resolve the stress in the fastest possible manner. Having said that, I will also highlight just a few doubts about how the process is going to pan out and how it may unfold in future. Is for the reason because of the peculiarities of the Indian credit market, in the sense that as opposed to markets that you see in US, UK, or Singapore, there the bankers are trained in understanding the business realities and taking a decision as swift as possible. But as opposed to that, in India, with the experience of CIRPs and with the experiences of IBC, I'm not saying that everything is to be blamed upon banks or the credit market, but pre-pack in a sense requires more sophistication at the bankers level than at the level of judiciary, or for that matter at the end of the regulators. So that will also again come to test. So with these are my opening remarks. Over to you, Richa.
Thank you so much, Mr. Kothari, for your opening remarks. Participants, if you have any questions for the pre-pack, we'll take up towards the end of the session. We have prepared a few basic questions on which we will seek the view or opinion of the panelists over here, so that the participants can get a brief overview or idea about how pre-pack is going to work. As Mr. Bhavani has already mentioned, there is one case which has already been admitted with regard to pre-pack by NCLT Ahmedabad, which is of GCCL Infrastructure and Projects. So while the amendment was brought in during the time of COVID, and there's already one case which has now come up for pre-pack, it is becoming even more pertinent for MSME sector to know how the pre-pack will actually work. And the bankers are also in the process of formulating their internal policy documents with respect to pre-pack. Therefore, I have framed few questions which will cover most of the regulations or procedural aspects with regard to pre-pack. However, there may be still more questions which you might have with regard to pre-pack, so you may keep it open, which will take up during the end of the session. So starting with the very basic, I will like to seek the response from Kanishk ma'am. Ma'am, the basic question that our participants may be willing to know is, when can you go for pre-pack and when can you not go for a pre-pack? So how do you decide whether you can go for a pre-pack or not go for the pre-pack? So what will be the guiding stone for this?
I'm sorry, I was muted. Yeah, the code itself, lays down rules or sort of guidelines, if I can use that word, which provide or stipulate that what is the eligibility criteria if an entity wishes to go for pre-pack insolvency. First criteria and foremost criteria, as we've discussed, all four of us, is that the business entity should be either a micro, small, or medium enterprise. And the definition of micro, small, or medium enterprise has been given in MSME Development Act 2006. Now the definition is based on the money that has been invested in plant and machinery of the business organization, and also the annual turnover which the organization has, or the annual revenue. So for a micro entity, the annual turnover, the threshold limit is that your annual turnover should be less than 5 crores and your investment in plant and machinery should be less than 1 crores. Similarly, for enterprises which fall in the definition of small enterprises, their investment in plant and machinery should be less than 10 and annual turnover should be 50. These figures for a medium enterprises are 50 crore for investment in P&M, plant and machinery, and 250 crore for annual turnover. So this is the basic eligibility which you need to satisfy. Once you've done that, then another criteria is that you should already not be under a corporate insolvency resolution process. If you are undergoing CIRP, you cannot initiate prepackaged insolvency process. So you should not be under a CIRP. That is another criteria. And one very important criteria is that there should be a debt. If you owe a debt, you are under distress and you default, then you can certainly go for prepackaged insolvency. And as Amir mentioned, that the onus here is on the active role being played by the promoters. They themselves have to, prepare the first base resolution. And then on that base resolution, resolutions are invited, if there is need, are invited from other resolution applicants. So these are the basic criteria. If you satisfy this basic criteria, you should be able to file prepacks application. And then there are other preconditions, which we'll discuss, I'm sure, in the later part of the session.
Ma'am, just a quick follow-up question, which might be in mind of most of the participants over here. You've mentioned that an MSME can go for prepack. So you've laid down certain criteria have been laid down in the MSME Act, which states that if you meet those criteria, you can you are classified as an MSME, you will be eligible for a prepack. However, whether it is a requirement that you should be a registered MSME under MSME Act to go for prepack, and if you are not a registered MSME, what are the preconditions which will have to be satisfied? Can you briefly?
Actually, a very good point. You have to be registered with MSME Act. And in fact, the application format, which is provided under the rules, requires the applicant to state the registration number. You have to be registered with Ministry of MSME, and the UID number, your unique identification number that you get upon registration with Ministry, that has to be quoted in the application to prove that you are registered. So I'm sure there will be number of organizations, business entities, which fall within this definition based on the investment that is made into plant and machinery. But still there may be, those organizations may not have registered formally with Ministry. So if you're not formally registered, you will have to register. And we've seen that the registrations since last year, when the definition of MSME was also altered, the registrations have gone up, not just because of prepacks, but due to certain other benefits that MSMEs are provided with. So yes, that's a good point, that you need to be formally registered. I'm sorry, I missed it.
And if I may add, now the registration is online under Udyam. So there's an Udyam website which is open, where any MSME who is falling under the set criteria may just get it registered online. So that's a good move as well.
Thank you, ma'am, for your view. Since Mr. Bhavani is on screen, I would like to pose a question for you now. So we have been talking about the base resolution plan, which has to be submitted prior to initiation of prepack. So what are the other prerequisites that are there for a prepack? As in, what is a corporate debtor required to do before filing for a prepack? And what is the financial criteria required to do before filing a prepack? Is there any specific role of the insolvency professional before the actual filing of the prepack? If you can briefly tell us about that.
Yeah, so basically the major role is over here being played by the corporate debtor or the corporate entity itself, but the duties are actually interwoven. So first of all, the corporate applicant would have to give a declaration to the financial creditors that they are not going ahead with prepack to defraud the creditors. That has to be written under a declaration. Second, that once the prepack is approved by the financial creditors, that yes, you can go, it has to be done within 90 days. So this is also part of the declaration. The third thing is a special resolution of the members is also required, that this MSME entity wants to go for it, and a special resolution also have to be in place. Now, looking at from the perspective of the financial creditors, first they would give a nod with 10% unrelated financial creditors. They would come up with a name. of an insolvency professional who will be appointed by the honorable tribunal as resolution professional. So this over here is 10%. But when the meeting is called, now the calling of the meeting is to be done by the corporate entity. When the meeting is called, at that time, 66% of the unrelated financial creditors should give a go ahead for two things. First, the name as suggested by the 10%, that yes, that person can be appointed as an RP. And second, that yes, this entity can go for a pre-pack because it's falling under the MSME and they are willing to go ahead with that. Now, the duty of the insolvency professional prior to the pre-pack insolvency is that he should prepare a preliminary report, as per the provisions of IBC, specifically addressing the MSME, that yes, this entity is eligible to go for the pre-packaged insolvency resolution process, and should also ascertain the list of the creditors. Now, here comes a big thing. The corporate entity would give the list of the names of the creditors. That's a list of the claims, their names, their securities, and the amount. And if at all they go anywhere here and there, they are actually held liable because penal provisions are in place. So what the IRP would have to do is, would just have to collate those claims which have been given by the corporate debtor and see in what classes they are, and then prepare a report. FCs would approve the name of RP, would also approve this, that yes, the entity can go for the pre-pack insolvency resolution process.
Mr. Bhavani, a quick follow-up question for you. Like you've already given a brief about what are the prerequisites in terms of IBC, which is required for a pre-pack, but in terms of practical approach, what is actually required for initiation of pre-pack? Like we know that the financial creditor will have to approve the base resolution plan. So will a formal approval required on the base resolution plan, or can without evaluating the base plan, the financial creditors can go for pre-pack? Because in any case there will be competing plans which might be invited, right?
Yeah. So in terms of practicality, the first practicality is that MSME should have an investor. That entity is ready and willing to come on board. Before that, he should be able, that he or she, or as ma'am said, as it, the corporate entity should be taking the creditors into consideration, and they should be on board that yes, you will go for it. That's actually the biggest hurdle. As you also said, Richa, that all the banks and financial institutions are doing their internal things for the approval, and it's actually taking a lot of time, because it's not going to be a cakewalk for any MSME entity to convince the creditors that I'm going for a pre-pack, because otherwise everyone is eligible. But the creditors would be able to see what are the pros and cons for CIRP, or to get the dues from the other mechanisms such as SARFAESI and other things which are already available in the Indian legal system. And as respect to your question of the base resolution plan, the base resolution plan has to be submitted within 2 days of the initiation of pre-pack to the RP by the corporate entity or the corporate debtor itself. Now, what is done in the procedural aspect is that base resolution plan is put before the COC by the RP, and if at all that base resolution plan is not hampering the rights of the operational creditors, that's the first prerequisite. And if at all the FCs are convinced, then that base resolution plan stands approved. Or else, first chance is given to the corporate debtor itself to go back, work on the table, and get with a better offer. If at all the FCs are not satisfied, then RP would go for paper publication and invite the prospective resolution applicants, PRAs, from the open market, and that resolution plan which is come out from the open market advertisement would compete with the base resolution plan, and the best resolution plan would be then selected by the COC if at all. Then it goes to the adjudicating authority for its approval. But minded, this all things would have to happen within 90 days.
So, sir, basically, like you have mentioned that it will be a difficult task to convince the financial creditors for pre-pack. Like in case of restructuring, we have seen that bankers consider various perspectives, whether the business is at all viable or not. And sometimes they also seek additional security, collateral, or contribution from the company. So do you think that that will also continue to play an important role for
It
pre-pack?
does, especially more so because of MSME, because MSMEs are such specialized entities wherein the insolvency professional may also not be able to run the corporate entity as a going concern. And that was one of the major reasons to keep the corporate debtor in possession or in control while the pre-pack is ongoing, because it is not as if a fresh person comes with so much of legal experience or cost accounting or chartered accounting experience and run the show. MSMEs are specialized entities. If there is a small hiccup, it can actually ruin the whole entity. So that would actually be one of the touchstones on which it will be tested, whether this entity is viable, and if it is viable, then should it be again given to the corporate debtor, though only the management would change. And if at all the answers are yes, then only I'm sure the financial creditors are going to come on board. And obviously we all know, as being practicing lawyers and appearing before NCLT, the haircut is the biggest challenge these days. And even we advocates are grilled for our clients as well.
Kanishk ma'am, a question for you. Since we know that there are already existing provisions with respect to insolvency and liquidation in the IBC, even for voluntary liquidation, as we know. So what are the new elements that has been introduced with respect to pre-pack? What is the speciality about pre-pack, or how do you distinguish it from other modes that are already existing? As in, why should one go for pre-pack, or what are the innovations that are there with respect to pre-pack?
We briefly discussed this, all three of us. We've somehow, somewhere or the other, answered it already. That the biggest change is that the control remains with the corporate debtor. And another change is that the promoters are also eligible to be the resolution. They can also bring up resolution plan. So what it does is that they remain in control, and Amir mentioned that MSMEs are of special character. They can not be managed by anybody, any professional just jumping into on the bandwagon and immediately he can start or she can start to manage it. So they have a special character, they have a special nature, which is completely and very well understood by the people who are already managing it. So the fact that those people who have been managing it are allowed to manage, that is the biggest change. And why the law has allowed same management to continue is not because there is a provision that you are allowing that management which led the company to distress to continue in management. No, here the situation is that maybe the industry or the economy as a whole is not working really well, is going through a dull phase. And because of the economic and environmental changes, as in business environment changes, there is impact on your business. And because you as a business manager in that industry understand everything related to that business, you also understand why there has been lull in your industry and how you can overcome that. That is why this provision has been specifically made explicitly, that you as a management are allowed to continue despite the fact that you were at the helm of affairs when company fell into distress. Another area that I feel which is sort of a new element is that Amir already mentioned it, that all your stakeholders, which is your creditors and of course the corporate debtor, they need to be on board. They themselves decide the term and conditions of entire restructuring that will take place once the plan is approved by the tribunal. They themselves decide whether how much money will be put in by the new investor, who that new investor will be, in what ways will the duration of the loan or the existing debt will be increased, will the interest be waived off or lessened. So all these terms and conditions, the specific elements of the resolution plan are already decided. So it's like, see, if I were to just give you an example, even before this law came into picture in India or maybe elsewhere in the world, the private arrangements to restructure may probably always existed, right? You, as a business management or business owner group, you, whenever company is in distress, the debt is high, you do approach your lenders for restructuring that debt in some form or the other. Sometimes maybe by waiving the interest part, sometimes maybe the lengthening the duration of the debt that exists on the date. So there, it has already existed in the practical world, but now what it has got is sanction of the court also. Once you formulate this kind of agreement in form of resolution plan between the creditor and debtor, that receives the assent or the sanction of the tribunal also, and then it is binding not just on the private parties who basically who are the main parties to that resolution, but binding on everyone. Another, which is not new, but which benefit is available and which makes it attractive, is that benefit of moratorium is also available to PPI under PPI-IRP, not just in CIRP. So I feel these two things which are talked about, these make it, these are the new elements. Otherwise, everything else, like strict timelines, in what time, what is the role of each stakeholder, for example, resolution professional, what is the role of corporate debtor, what is the role of the financial creditors, all those were already on the law book for CIRP. So I can't say that these elements are very new, other than that the management kind of retains controls, barring very few situations in which control may be given to resolution professional also, and that the terms and conditions of the resolution are already decided and agreed upon before you initiate the process.
Richa, with your permission, if I can also pitch in on one aspect which would also be of interest to many lawyers who are joining us today, is that as Amir earlier mentioned, that the list of creditors which will be prepared by which will be confirmed by the RPA as opposed to prepared by the RP is going to be only the information which the corporate debtor, its promoters or directors provide to the RP. Now, what is the fail-safe mechanism that we have in place now? Earlier, it used to be an adjudication sort of mechanism before the RP, that a list as a claim form, whether as a FC or whether as an OC or other creditors would be filed, and the RP will apply his or her mind and then come to a decision. Then we will sue ensuing litigation before the NCLT under section 60, saying that the claim was wrongly rejected or the other creditor's claim should not have been rejected, or the fight on who has what security and in what manner one gets portioned. So all those, that big chunk of litigation that we saw emanating from that aspect, whether RP is a quasi-judicial authority or an administrative authority in deciding who has what claim, that entire thing has just gone away in this, and it's the RP has to just confirm the list of creditors provided by the company. And what is the fail-safe mechanism, as I asked earlier to myself? The mechanism, as Amir earlier mentioned, there are penal provisions, and if you see, there is an indemnification section for the first time. I mean, if it is there in other laws, but I do not recall reading such a section in itself, where the promoters or directors of the corporate debtor shall indemnify any and every person who has suffered loss because of some misstatements in the list provided by the company to the RP. So that's something very unique, and there is a specific subsection in that section providing that the necessary proceedings for claiming those damages against the promoters or directors of the corporate debtor will lie before courts having appropriate jurisdiction. So that's one area where promoters and directors would have to worry about in going forward in these pre-pack mechanism, and that's a diversion from our standard CIRP also.
Thank you, Mr. Kothari. Actually, in earlier voluntary winding up provision under the earlier Companies Act 1956, there was a requirement for the directors to give a declaration of solvency for the company before initiating voluntary winding up. So for that respect, there was already a provision that in case the company is not solvent and it is later found so, in that case, the directors were held liable and would be required to contribute the deficit amount. So I think it might have been taken up somewhere from there to make them liable.
Yes. But here, every person who has suffered loss has a separate cause of action against the promoter or the directors of the company, which is something very unique.
Yes, definitely. So there are a lot of complications which are there in pre-pack. So while we talk about complications, the first step of litigation, that is filing of application for pre-pack, is a very difficult situation where the clients come up to us with regard to drafting and with regard to the litigation. So generally, they are not aware of what are the main contents of the application or what will be the documents that will be required with regard to the application that has to be filed. So Kanishk ma'am, may I please request you to give a brief overview of what should be the contents of the application? What are the documents that law requires us to give along with the application, and other documents which you think that might be relevant even if not specifically prescribed by law?
The application is filed under Section 54C and Rule 4 of Insolvency and Bankruptcy Prepackaged Insolvency Resolution Process Rules 2021. It's not a very complicated application format, or it does not require great drafting skills, but yes, it requires you to key in or to give each and every relevant information to the PPIRP to resolution plan. So just starting with the most obvious thing that you must mention in your, and that is required to be mentioned in the application, is names and details of the corporate applicant and corporate debtor. So everything about corporate debtor, the names and details of, for instance, directors are also given. What are your registration details with the Ministry of MSME, your registered office, your paid up capital, everything is mentioned. I've mentioned about details of directors also. Then next set of thing that the application must stipulate is the details of the resolution professional. We all know this is not a new provision, which is new requirement. Then very obviously, you need to give the details of the debt, entire debt. And Hemant made a very good point of indemnity. I feel I would like to add there a very brief thing. It's another form of checks and balances, just to ensure that the corporate debtor, who is in quite very good control of the process, that corporate debtor does not abuse the process and gives the name of or the details of each and every debt that is owed on that particular date. That is how I see it. Of course, it may pose problems, and it may be a cause of multitude litigation. But yes, it has been included just as a form of ensuring that each debt is included by the corporate debtor while assimilating or compiling that list of creditors, I'm sorry. So once you've given the debt details of debt, you are also required to prove that debt. You have to annex everything that is in your possession relating to that debt, documentary proof. If there is any security, then you also need to annex the documentary proof relating to that security. If you're a company and charge related documents have been filed, then those documents are all to be annexed. Then there are a number of documents that you need to attach. If in case of financial creditors, you need to attach your record of default with information utility. If in case of operational creditors, you need to attach invoices, demand notices that have been issued to for the operational debt. Then books of accounts, audited financial statements for last 2 years, approval that you've obtained from creditors in respect of resolution professional, and also in respect of the approval that has been received for initiation of the application. Then obviously you need to give written consent of the resolution professional also. In fact, the regulations that are in place, they also mention the they also prescribe the forms which are to be used, or the formats which are to be used for these particular things, like consent of the RP, or in what way you have to submit the declaration from the directors. Special resolution, this was already mentioned and discussed. Approval I've already covered. So these are few details. Basically, the crux is that every detail relating to the corporate debtor, corporate applicant, resolution, professional, and obviously the creditors. And for creditors, we're talking about debt, we're talking about restructuring of debt. So we have to give each and every detail relating to debt, and also provide each and every documentary proof of all the debts that we are talking about. So these are few things which we need to mention in or stipulate in our application.
Ma'am, you've made this filing of application very simple for us. I think all of the participants will now know what are the contents of the application, and they'll be easily able to file the application. So now, since we have already filed an application for pre-pack, it will be pertinent to now know what are the actionables that has to be done once pre-pack has been initiated. So I would like to ask Mr. Kothari, once the application has been filed and maybe it has been admitted by the adjudicating authority, what are the actionables that are actually required to be taken? What is the requirement that RP has to do? The corporate debtor, what is the role of the financial creditors? Can you distinguish between the role of the three parties and the actionables that has to be done in general after pre-pack has been initiated? Mr. Kothari?
Sure, Richard. So this question would actually encompass the entire process that needs to be undertaken after the filing of the application. Obviously, after filing of the application, the NCLT will admit the application, and then we would have a pre-pack commencement date. And from that date, I saw a question in the chat box also, that what are the timelines under pre-pack. So the timelines are basically 90 days are there with the resolution professional and the COC to come up with either approve the base resolution plan or to approve one of the competitive resolution plans that they have gotten. And you have to file it by the end of the 90th day, after which there are 30 days prescribed under law with the NCLT to approve that resolution plan. So those are the broad timelines, and we'll see once they are into operation to what extent they are being applied, and we can have the parallel precedents from the CIRP aspect also, that the time spent in legal proceedings will have to be excluded, and to what extent that applies in this process also, that we'll see. So once the NCLT application is admitted, the immediate things that happen are that the moratorium gets in place, as told by Kanishk ma'am. And the moratorium comes in place, and as we said that it's a mixture of model in as much as that the creditors as well as the debtors are in control. The management of the company will not get suspended. It will lie with the directors, the partners, whether as of the company or the LLP. And after the management continues with them, the immediate actionable on part of RP would be to confirm the committee of to confirm the list of creditors and to convene the first meeting of the COC, which would have to be convened within 7 days, and then that list may be updated from time to time, and the COC may be reconstituted on that basis. The RP is also to monitor the management of the corporate debtor and to see that the board of directors or the members of the company are working in accordance with the regulations or some sort of guidelines laid down in terms of the IBC. And one interesting thing that comes as a check again, as Kanishk ma'am mentioned about checks and balances in the system, that while it is a debtor in control model, uh, there are enabling provisions by which, if the RP comes to sort of some findings that the business of the company is being done in a fraudulent manner, or there is gross mismanagement of the affairs of the corporate debtor, then the COC with 66% of the vote can take over the management of the company, and then the entire process of suspension of management, vesting of the management in the RP, and everything will follow. But for that, there are two requirements. One, the COC needs to approve that action by 66% vote, and second, RP will have to file an application before NCLT, and then NCLT will order that process to be put in place. So for a 90 days period, we have too much in our basket to do. But yeah, that's one of the uh, sort of elements of this process. And after collating list of creditors, monitoring management of corporate debtor, uh, constitution of COC, the other major responsibility that is there with the RP is of preparing the information memorandum. As it was mentioned earlier, that before even filing the application, there is a requirement to prepare a preliminary information memorandum. So that preliminary information memorandum is submitted by the corporate debtor to the resolution professional within 2 days of the commencement date, and thereafter the RP will finalize it as an information memorandum. So as and when the COC decides that it has to go into open market, get more resolution applicants, then that information memorandum and other relevant information will be used. And as I said, that the list of claims will have to be provided by the corporate debtor. The preliminary information memorandum will have to be provided by the corporate debtor, and that has to be done within 2 days of the commencement date. And then the company is to be run by the management of the corporate debtor in accordance with the in accordance with the IBC and the provisions of the chapter concerning feedback of MSME. What needs to be seen is that the factor on the RP to run the company as a going concern, whether that applies to the management of the corporate debtor or not, has to be, that's not in sort of the direct wordings has not been stated, but one may find reference to that from the fact that in like RP's major decisions were subject to the approval of Committee of Creditors as regards the business also in terms of Section 28 of IBC under CIRP. That has also been Section 28 as far as its application to prepack of MSMEs has also been amended to say that any major decisions which are listed under Section 28 can only be taken by the corporate debtor post the approval of the COC. That would include decisions like selling of the assets, changing the capital structure, changing or raising interim financing during this process. So those are the major sort of decisions which one would have to take to not run as the company as a going concern, and those have been made subjected to the COC's decision. So we see another example of checks and balances in as regards that aspect. Now, coming to the role of COC and the role of financial creditors, as the first meeting is convened within 7 days, and then thereafter it may be convened as the COC decides. And one of the broadly two major things that the COC would do in during this whole process is also, while the RP is monitoring the management of the corporate debtor, the COC being an interested party and having the approval authority in terms of Section 28 would also be monitoring the business of the corporate debtor and would make the promoters and directors answerable to them during those COC meetings, as it is doing in ordinary CIRPs that we are doing, that we are seeing. And that is more so in this process, because there is an enabling provision, as I mentioned, in terms of 54J, that if there are circumstances of fraud or gross mismanagement, the COC can decide to transfer the management of the company to RP. So that responsibility of overseeing the business of the company becomes more becomes more predominant in this system, as from the day one it is not with the RP. So that's one aspect of the duty of the financial creator. And the second aspect, and which is the pivotal aspect of this chapter, is consideration and approval of resolution plan. The way resolution plans are approved is basically there is a base resolution plan, and then there are competitive resolution plans. So that will be discussed in minuter details later on, but the approval mechanism remains same as it is under CIRP. So that's with regard to the financial creators, the management being overseen, and also the resolution plan process being overseen. And one thing that I would also want to highlight from RP's aspect is that, like under CIRP, the fraudulent and fraud, the avoidance transaction, preferential and fraudulent transaction, undervalued transaction, extortionate transaction, that audit also needs to be done, and that needs to be done within 60 days. So that's also a challenge for RP in terms of actionable items. Over to you, Richard.
So a lot of things to be done within a period of 90 days, I guess. The role of RP and COC, as we understand, is very important even in case of pre-pack. But there will be general queries with respect to how the RP will handle the claims that is received by them. Although we have discussed that the initial list of creditors will be supplied by the corporate debtors, there may be instances when the corporate debtor does not include the name of a creditor in the list. However, a claim is later received by such creditor. There may be certain contingent liabilities in case of ongoing litigations which are there. So so Tanishq ma'am, can you please answer that? How will the RP actually admit or verify those claims? Will it solely rely on the books of accounts prepared by the corporate debtor? How will the actual process go on?
No, it is the responsibility of resolution professional to confirm that list of creditors which has been submitted by the company. Then another thing that resolution professional can do to verify the claims is to see the books of accounts, the audited financial statements of the last year also can be seen. Last 2 years can also be assessed and see what was, to confirm the list of creditors. Then the resolution professional also writes to each and every creditor that whose name features on that particular list, and that is done with an intention to basically confirm whether the claim that has whether the amount of debt, the security, if any, that the details of debt that are mentioned in that list, is that correct or not. The creditor to whom the resolution professional writes informs that this is the list, these are the details that are under my possession. That creditor has the opportunity to raise an objection against if any detail does not seem authentic or does not seem correct, or seems or seems that there should be some modification in that information. The creditor can raise objection and write back to the resolution professional. On the basis of these things, along obviously new documents can also be submitted by the creditor. On the basis of assessment of the books that have been submitted by the debtor, on the basis of the list that has been submitted by the debtor, and on the basis of the objections that have been received from the creditors, the resolution professional is required to update the list of creditors, and it is resolution professionals' responsibility to ensure that that list is always up to date. Another, not direct but indirect, again, checks and balance for what you mentioned, that will he only rely or will she only rely on the information that has been submitted by the debtor and by the and the objection raised by the creditor. This list is also pasted or displayed on the website of the company and is also filed with the board. So basically it's available for inspection for anyone, because once it is on the website and the network, then it is available to everyone. On the basis of that also claims may be received, but there is no direct or explicit provision relating to that. However, the intention seems to be that if you've displayed the list, if you've put it in public domain, obviously the intention is that the public at large knows about it. And if there are any discrepancies, those can be pointed out. Otherwise, there is absolutely no purpose of putting it in public space. It will remain in the records of resolution profession only. So yeah.
So I understand that the process of claim verification is very similar to how it is done during CIRP or liquidation, relying on books of the corporate debtor. Claim is received from the creditors, publishing of the list of creditors on the website. How is the COC handled in pre-pack? As in, once the COC, how is the COC constituted? What is the constitution of the COC? And how the COC meetings are generally convened? Can Mr. Kothari address these situations? Mr. Kothari, please.
Yes, Richa. So predominantly the manner and the modalities of convening COC meetings and conducting COC meetings is quite similar to how it is done under CIRP. The only and the same principles and the same regulations apply to the extent that the notices have to be given prior in time, and the period of notices should be 5 days unless it is agreed to be shorter by the entire COC, and it can be done in a physical or via video conferencing manner. And Section 21 applies mutatis mutandis. The related parties do not have a voting share, and even at the admission stage, also the non-related party financial creditors have a greater say and participation. And because Section 21 will apply mutatis mutandis, the directors will also participate in the COC meetings. So to that extent, it is quite similar to the mechanism that we have already in place under CIRP.
Thank you, Mr. Kothari. Mr. Bhavani, we have already discussed so much about how the CD will be managed during the time of pre-pack, that the management will continue to vest with the board of directors of the company. But we would like to know how much intervention will be done by the RP or the COC, and how much independence of management will continue to be there with the directors of the company?
Yeah, so as we all know, this is a debtor in controlled regime. So obviously the management of the corporate debtor would be with the earlier board itself. However, there are actually very well placed checks and balances. First is that RP on behalf of the financial creditors would oversee the operations of the corporate debtor. So there is always an eye upon the operations. And RP is also duty bound to attend all the meetings and all the relevant conversations which happen in the board. So that's first. Second, that RP ensures that the CD is kept as a going concern. However, the duty is or the obligation is casted upon the corporate debtor to keep it as a going concern, but RP would have to ensure that. And board of directors are also under an obligation to preserve the value of the assets. And also there are checks and balances with respect to this, wherein the RP or the COC, if at all they believe that the corporate debtor is not being managed or is being managed fraudulently, then they can always, with a resolution of 66%, approach the Honorable Adjudicating Authority for appropriate orders. And Board of Directors are also under an obligation to discharge their contractual obligations. So now this sword which is hanging upon the existing board would actually make it a win-win situation, wherein the RP would only oversee on behalf of the FCs, but because the MSME entity itself wants this company to go on, and that is why in the first place they have gone on for pre-pack, would also ensure that it is kept as a going concern. So I believe this is actually a very good mechanism, because under 90 days, if RP manages the CD, then everything goes for a toss.
So I believe that the role of COC is also pertinent in pre-pack, mostly with regard to exercising their commercial wisdom with regard to approval of the resolution plan, right? So how does resolution happen in pre-pack? In case we have been talking about significantly better plan is received, there'll be competing Swiss challenge bid that will be there. So what will be a significantly better plan? How will the plan be? How will be the competition between two plans be done? Whether if in case there's two plans which are significantly better, so in that case, will all the three plans be voted upon? How will it work exactly?
Basically, we all know that the corporate debtor would have to have a base plan before they even go to the court for pre-pack. So once the base plan is there and the pre-pack admission order has been given by the Honorable NCLT, within 2 days, that plan has to be submitted to the RP. RP, meanwhile, within 2 to 3 days would go for an advertisement stating that pre-pack has been initiated for such an entity, and within 7 days would constitute the COC and would place before them this plan. Now over here, the COC would first see whether this is commercially viable or not. Secondly, they'll see whether any rights of the operational creditors are infringed. If at all, then this plan cannot be taken up. Even if it is, even if the plan which has been given by the corporate debtor does not infringe the rights of the operational creditor, but the COC is of an opinion that there can be an improvement in the plan, an opportunity is given to the corporate debtor to first of all change or come up with a better value on the table. If at all that is not acceptable to the COC, then COC can always pass a resolution and direct the resolution professional to go for the advertisement or paper publication, wherein he will invite the PRAs as it has been done under Form G and CIRP. So they will invite the prospective resolution applicants. They will file the plan, and at that time the base resolution plan would be weighed in terms of commercial viability as well as the impairment of the operational creditors. Now, to answer your question, what will happen if we have two better plans? So the evaluation matrix concept as under CIRP would also apply here, and the COC would have their own evaluation metrics and would also, as you rightly said, would go for Swiss challenge and bidding may happen. And as we all know that under CIRP, we must have heard a lot of times that the liquidation or the death of an entity is the last resort. So if at all there are 3, 4, 5 plans, I'm sure the COC would want it to be voted upon, and all of them would be tested on the waters with respect to how much they provide the value maximization. And one of the best plans, which is a best alternative plan, would be selected and would be placed before the Honorable Adjudicating Authority. All of this within 90 days, and adjudicating authority would have 30 days to either approve or reject the plan.
Being very positive of having a lot of approvals under pre-pack, given the timeline of 90 days. What if the resolution plan has not been approved or no plan has been received at all? What will be the end result? How will the pre-pack terminate? Will it directly go into will the company directly go into liquidation, or how will it work?
After the commencement of CIRP and before any plan has been tabled or approved by the COC. If the COC with 66% of the majority passes a resolution that this entity is not at all viable or it cannot be revived, then such an application can be filed and pre-pack can be terminated, which is opposed to liquidation. Also, if there is no plan which is on table or any plan has been approved within 90 days, it's not there on the table of COC, then also the termination happens. And resolution plan selected by the COC after competing with the base plan is also not approved by the COC, then in this scenario also it will lead to termination. So these are the three scenarios wherein the pre-pack can be terminated, while we'll have to keep in mind this termination is opposed to the liquidation. This is just a termination, and which is a very, very concept taken up by the legislature.
So will there also be a possibility of initiating CIRP post pre-pack admission? As in, like you mentioned, the termination of pre-pack might not result in immediate slippage into liquidation, but how will the pre-pack admission, can it be converted into CIRP or liquidation case at all?
Yes, it can be. And there's a scenario wherein the COC feels that the management of the corporate debtor is actually prejudicial to the stakeholders. At that time, they can go for the voting and pass a resolution with majority of 66% and can approach the adjudicating authority stating that this entity is eligible for CIRP, because we will also have to see that. And if at all yes, then it can be converted into a CIRP and pre-pack stands terminated and CIRP starts. At this time, the RP or the IRP who are managing the pre-pack would also have to give a fresh consent that yes, he is eligible and is also willing to just like we do under Form 2 for CIRP, that is willing to become a resolution professional for this. But one thing is to be kept in mind that if at all there's a PUFE, preferential undervalued fraudulent or extortionate transaction application, that is avoidance transaction application, which is pending, no matter what happens, it's a termination or the conversion from pre-pack to CIRP, that will still continue.
Off to Kanishk ma'am. Ma'am, we've already discussed in brief the timeline for pre-pack, the 90 days, 60 days. A lot of timelines have been discussed. But a lot of things we understand have to be done in a short time frame provided under the code. In CIRP and liquidation cases, we are seeing that already matter is being dragged beyond the timeline provided. There are delays in evaluation of the plan. Somebody contests the plan. What is to be done in such cases? And what are the timelines for other actions and all the actions which has to be done by the RP or the COC that has been laid down in the pre-pack rules or in the IBC?
The broad timeline is obviously 120 days within which the entire process has to be completed. And out of these 120 days, there are two blocks. First, that is of 90 days. And within 90 days, the resolution plan has to be presented to the adjudicating authority, that is tribunal. And the next set of 30 days, within that period, the tribunal has to either approve or reject that plan. Then, other than this broad time limit that is prescribed under the code, there are timelines for every action. And there are a number of actions, for instance, because it will take a lot of time to list everything. Just as an example, for instance, if a corporate debtor has to submit list of claims, so that has to be submitted within 2 days of commencement date. Usually the timeline that is provided under the code for these specific actions, the base time that is taken is date from which the application for PPIRP is admitted by the tribunal. So from that date, 7 days, 2 days, those limits are prescribed within which actions are to be taken by either resolution professional or corporate debtor and creditors. So for every juncture, these timelines are provided. Your next question was that what will happen if these timelines are breached, that is yet to be seen, because we've seen, our experience has been that these timelines are breached and number of factors intervene because of which these timelines are breached. And in fact, one of the basic and most prominent criticism of CIRP is that it is proving to be very lengthy, despite the fact that code explicitly provides a time period within which it should be completed. That is yet to be seen, that if these timelines will be strictly adhered to. In my understanding, these will be adhered to. Otherwise, in a way, the purpose is defeated, because the objective, one of the objectives for which this change has been brought, is that the asset which the corporate debtor holds, those the value of those assets should not depreciate, and the quick resolution, the process of quick resolution should ensure that the value it does not depreciate. So that process, that objective will be defeated, which is one of the very basic objective which underlies, which is the underlying factor for PIR. So I believe these will be adhered to. However, it is difficult to say at this stage whether these will be breached and what will be the consequences, in what ways, who will be punished, who will bear the consequences of these violation or breach of these timelines.
Thank you, ma'am. There have been a lot of discussion on the similarities that exist between a CIRP and the pre-pack. However, our participants might want to know what is the difference that is there between pre-pack and Section 10. Section 10 application which is filed under IBC, because Section 10 application is also something which is initiated by the corporate debtor itself. So, Mr. Kothari, will you be able to differentiate between the pre-pack, normal pre-pack process and the Section 10 application that is filed by the corporate debtor?
See, the major conceptual difference between the two processes, which we have already discussed, that once you file a Section 10 application or a Section 7 or a Section 9, the creditor in control model sets in itself in place, while under a pre-pack, the debtor in control model remains in place with obvious checks and balances, which we have already discussed. So that being the major conceptual difference from technicalities and from the fine print of law, what the difference you can probably say is also of the manner in which those applications can be filed. A Section 10 application only requires a special resolution, after which you can move it. There is no consent of creditors, or there is no solvency certificate, as you mentioned, in voluntary winding up. So it's a mere evidence of default that the corporate debtor would have to show, and also have to show the corporate authorizations for filing that application in terms of the special resolution. But for pre-pack, we have a sort of pre-pack assessment where there is a base resolution plan, there's a preliminary IM, and IP is appointed, and that whole exercise gets set in place. And after which you have the option of filing the pre-pack application. So that's, I think, the difference between the two.
So while you've highlighted most of the points of difference, I think one of the major difference that exists between a pre-pack and CIRP might be that in case of pre-pack, the funding and cost that is to be incurred. So the corporate debtor has to transfer the money in a separate bank account, which is not required under Section 10 application in IBC. So that is, I think, a main distinguishing factor from operational point of view, right? So, according to you, what are the advantages or disadvantages that the pre-pack may have in the long run? Because many of our participants are also asking what will be the benefit that corporate debtors will reap out of the pre-pack?
See, in terms of benefits, surely it provides in terms of theory, it provides a very seamless platform for debtors to quickly resolve the stress and come out of the stress. But while we see the practical application and from the past experiences, the problems that we envisage, so that journey will have to be looked at. But obviously, in theory, it sounds like a very good framework to have. And that is more so also from the perspective, one point which I wanted to highlight earlier, and that while we have had the mechanisms of intercreditor agreement for a resolution of stress in terms of SDR, CDR, then S4A, and then we had our uh, with 12 Feb circular, and now we have 7 June circular. That is obviously for large accounts, but a framework like that was never there for MSMEs. So from that perspective, it obviously provides a very new framework and opportunity for all the debtors to have the resolution done. Because one of the problems that now that I'm practicing in a tier 2 city and many MSME clients come to me, one of the practical difficulties that they really face is whenever they go to banks for restructuring or some sort of settlement. The bankers would want to help, but they would say that we don't have an enabling procedure or a framework in place with which we can help you. So that difficulty goes out of door, that we have now a framework in place. And the other highlights is that it's predominantly an out of court process, and with all the litigating points of CIRP being reduced to null. So that's a happy change which we see in this chapter. And in terms of challenges that we may face going forward, much has been discussed already, but a few things, as I highlighted in my opening remarks also, it is a burden on bankers really to have their internal policies in place, as mentioned by you, Richa, and also to have the swiftest possible decision making process so that they can reach to an agreement in 90 days. And anyone who has worked with consortiums or with the committee of creditors would know that there's no decision making on the day one that is set. It goes to the banks and it takes some 2-3 rounds of to and fro, and then also we don't have a decision in place. So that's the attitude with which we are really fighting in the credit market, that predominantly our banks are public sector banks and they work like bureaucrats, and you for a man to take a decision, there is a proportionate amount of fear that is there in the system. So that being one of the major challenge, and that's why pre-pack, which is a market driven mechanism, will also face halter in practical reality. And in terms of debtor in possession model also being there, we have had past experiences of that going awry. But in theory, we have checks and balances in place that the COC can decide anytime to take over the management. So let's hope for good, but the past experiences of debtor in possession model have not been good. And the third thing, which is also a principled sort of point on my part also, is that we are still sticking by section 29A of IBC, and in sticking by section 29A for MSMEs specifically, when there was earlier an exemption for MSMEs under CIRP, section 29A does not apply to MSMEs, but for pre-packs we have this application. So that sort of is a dichotomy. So that also needs to be seen. Yeah.
And if I may add, on the terms of timelines of 90 days and 120 days, we are very happy on paper, but no, practically we all know that it will be very difficult and uphill task. So on the benefit side, if it's there, 120 days, very good. On the sad side or the drawback side, I don't think we can harp much upon that being concluded within 90 days. And third thing is, I hope that this is mandatory and not directory, because if that order is coming from any higher authorities, then everything goes for a toss.
I completely agree with Mr. Bhavani on this. The timeline will be regarded as an advantage and as well as a disadvantage in case of pre-pack. One last follow-up question for Mr. Kothari with respect
Yes.
to the challenges for pre-pack. Do you think that the declaration with respect to avoidance transaction that has to be given by a corporate debtor might also serve as a challenge, as many corporate debtors will not be willing to go for pre-pack because they will already have to give a declaration for avoidance transaction?
certainly in practical realities also, that is one of the fetters, that Section 10 IPC applications are not filed by the debtors, and they sort of take their time to clean their books. So that is a problem that is existing, and will certainly be a fetter for pre-pack applications also, because in this system, more than the court scrutiny, there needs to be good faith between the creditors and debtors. And if that debtor is shying away from those problems, then to establish that repo and good faith with creditors will also be an uphill task.
Very rightly said. So I'll just take up the questions from the participants. I'll just read it one by one. So the first question is from Mr. Rohit Sharma. Will the investor have to pay the entire amount to the operational creditors? What benefit will the corporate debtor reap out of pre-pack? So this question, I think our panelists have already addressed, that the investor will not be required to pay the entire amount to the operational creditors. However, in case there is a haircut to the operational creditors, in that case, the competing bids to the base resolution plan will be invited, right?
Yeah, that's true. And also the word used in the legislation is it should not impair the rights of the operational creditors. So that is to be tested. What
And while the explanation, sorry to pitch in, Amit,
please.
the explanation to the section provides the meaning to impair, but it only says full repayment. What if there is restructuring of debts even to operational creditors? Would that also be regarded as impairment? Is an open question. Yeah.
Yes.
Right. So next question is from Dyuti Ghai. She's asking, what is the period of initiation of pre-pack? So I think she means to ask, when will the pre-pack actually initiate? On admission by the NCLT, or when you have initiated the process, pre-filing process for pre-pack? So Ms. Tyagi, will you?
As Mr. Hemant stated, there is a pre-pack regime which is to be done. So it is on the date of admission. So 90 days or 120 days would start ticking from the date of admission.
Next question is from Swapnil, that what is the protection for shareholder in case of winding up of a company? So I think this is not regarding pre-pack, but in case the speakers want to answer to this.
I don't think there is any protection as such given to the shareholders, and I'm sure it will also be as similar to CIRP, and under waterfall mechanism section 53 they'll be lying way too below.
So just one last question, Ms. Tyagi, if you would want to answer. What will be the NPA status of the company if it restructures its outstanding debt through a pre-pack? So I think she wants to know about the RBI guideline, something of that sort. Yes, Mr. Hemant, you want to answer?
Yes, I think her mic is on mute. If Ms. Tyagi, if you want to take up that question, I'll take up after you. So I'll go ahead. So it basically the NPA treatment, one of the major worries for banks is also, I think the question is also on those lines, that what would be the provisioning norms, and what will be the guidelines for standardizing the account once the resolution plan is approved under PPIRP. While RBI has not come out with any specific thing, but by way of deduction, it can be concluded that whatever guidelines that apply for resolution plan under CIRP will also apply here, because section 31 of the chapter on CIRP has been applied mutatis mutandis to it, and RBI guidelines are also vis-a-vis section 31. So I don't think there should be any doubt that the standardization norms and the provisioning norms would be similar to a resolution plan approved under CIRP.
Further, it'll be ending to the whole NPA thing, because it'll,
yes,
we all know it'll be a clean slate.
Right.
I'm sorry, somehow there was some problem with audio. I rejoined, but Hemant has already answered the question. I think Richa is stuck for us.
Yes, if there are no more questions, Madhura, if we can conclude the session.
Yes, yes. It seems Richa has some connectivity issue. So to all the
Yeah.
panelists and the speakers today, a big thank you for your time and your valuable contribution to make the session very insightful. Many thanks to Richa for wonderful moderation. And last but not the least, thank you to the participants for joining in today and making the session so interactive. We look forward to hosting you at the upcoming events of ILA. I shall be sending a detailed email about what ILA does and the upcoming calendar by tomorrow by email to all of us. Thank you and have a good weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madhura. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Madhura. Thank you, participants. Thank you, my co-panelist. Thank you, Richa.
Thank you.